feedback. So welcome back. And we are going to talk today about plant-based diets. So take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Jen. And hi again to those who were here last week. And if this is your first time here, I'm Kelly Morrow. I'm a registered dietitian, and I work with Lori Mishley, who is a naturopathic physician. She also has an MPH and a PhD in nutrition, and for the past 20 years has been studying Parkinson's disease and dietary and lifestyle factors that help slow the progression. And so she's been following a group of, depends on how many are participating at a time, but up to 3,000 people, and cataloging what they're eating and how they're living and publishing data about the people who are progressing the slowest. So I'm presenting some of that information and also talking about how to implement some of those strategies. So the previous class was all about that. What are kind of the basics of the research in terms of what dietary and lifestyle factors are associated with people who are progressing the slowest. And a big part of that is eating more of what we call a plant-based diet. So that's going to be the topic for today. I'm going to go ahead and do a share screen. And one of the things I'm really curious about is if you want to open up the chat, I'm curious to hear what you think about what a plant-based diet is. So if you were going to define, and you can make it succinct, but put in the chat, what are your ideas? If someone says, oh, I'm trying to eat a plant-based diet, what does that mean to you? Because there are a few different definitions. So that's one of the things I want to define for today. So go ahead and open up the chat if you want to add that in. And then I'll also share some of my ideas around that too. Does that look good, Jen?
Yes.
Good? Okay, great. All right. Oh, and this is my information here. If you do, I know some people had messaged with some questions as well. So certainly willing to help people with questions at the end. So these are the things that we'll cover today. What are the health benefits of a plant-based diet? How do you transition to a nutritionally balanced plant-based diet? Because, you know, Doritos and beer are actually plant-based, but we want to make sure that we're eating a plant-based diet that's healthy for your body and your brain. And then what are a few resources and some recipes, meal ideas? That's one of my favorite things to talk about. So we'll include that too. So what is Plant Slant? I'm curious if actually no one put anything in there. So maybe you're all pondering for yourselves and wondering what that means.
Do you not see those? Maybe they all came to me.
Oh, you know what? Actually, sorry, let me open this. Oh, okay, here we go. Yes, I can see it now.
Okay, good.
All right. Okay, so primarily vegetarian, a diet without meat or fish, vegetarian, minimally animal-based products. Yeah, making sure fruits and vegetables are the major part. Vegan. Okay, so plant-based means vegan. So everybody has a little bit of a different idea. Non-dairy, avoid meats. Yeah, so there are lots of different ways that you can define a plant-based diet. And so the way that I think about it, and the way that I think would be ideal when we're talking about Parkinson's and dietary patterns, and also not just ideal, but evidence-based. Like what is the data showing in terms of, you know, people who are progressing more slowly? And it's not completely vegan. I know that there are people who are vegan, but there are some animal-based foods that are associated with slower progression, and those include fish and eggs. And if we think about a completely vegan diet, there is actually no culture on the planet that's ever been vegan. And that's because humans need some animal proteins in order to survive. And I know some of you might be kind of scratching your head about that, but we need B12. And that is a certain vitamin that we can't get from plants. And I know that there are some B12 analogs that you might find in certain sea vegetables, and also cultures that where people aren't eating much animal protein, like maybe just a little bit. Um, we only need small amounts of B12, and we can store it in our liver. And so even small amounts can give us what we need. But the fact is that if you look, like people who are, anthropologists that study traditional diets throughout time, there's never been a culture that's been completely vegan. And so when we think of a plant-based diet or plant slant, it would be, I think, a good way to describe it would be mostly plants. So you're eating mostly plants, and there's going to be some animal proteins. If you are vegan, you would need to take a B12 supplement. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And if we look at the this image again, which I presented last week. So looking at what are the foods that are associated with people who are progressing more slowly, it's definitely more plant-based foods. The only two animal products in this green, on the green side, are eggs and fish. So we see a lot of animal foods over here, and also some of those highly processed foods as well. And so thinking about how to have more of these green foods is going to be a theme as we go through this series. Okay. I've worked in higher education for a long time. I really like to look at data, and I know that sometimes looking at these types of images can be like a ridiculogram. But I wanted to put this up here because I know some people do like to see this kind of data. And this is a study that is an overview of the effects of plant-based diets on the body and the brain. So it's a systematic review, meaning that the people who put the study together looked at a lot of different studies, and they tried to synthesize down what are the benefits that show up over and over, which helps us to increase our degree of confidence in the data that they collect. And so what we find is that people who are eating plant-based diets have more fiber. They have a lot more phytonutrients. So we talked about those last time. Those are those compounds in foods that really help our body to function, or our computer to function at a higher level. And they have less saturated fats and less inflammation. And a lot of the data really looks at this concept of inflammation, which is prevalent even more in people who have chronic disease. And so if we start here at the bottom, what we find is plant-based diets help to support a healthy bacteria in our gut. And so we can see here that there's a strong connection between our gut and our brain in terms of the types of bacteria that are in our gut, and the way that either the bacteria help us to process our food, the way that the bacteria communicate with our nervous system, and how our whole body functions. So there's a lot of research going on in terms of how a healthy gut and the bacteria balance that we have can help in so many ways. And it's also helpful for Parkinson's. And so we see that that is a big part of a plant-based diet, that getting a variety of fibers really is helpful to support the brain. But when we're looking at the body overall, we can see that plant-based proteins, or plant-based foods, do have proteins and amino acids that help us to make neurotransmitters. So even things like tyrosine, which is a precursor to dopamine, I mean, we get all of those amino acids from plant-based foods, especially eating a variety of plants. We see here a reduction. So cytokines are chemical compounds in the body that can create, well, they're communication molecules, but some of them are inflammatory. And so it helps to reduce those inflammatory molecules in the body. Some of you might on your labs be looking at things like C-reactive protein or HSC reactive protein, and or CRP, and the plant-based diets help to reduce that. Metabolites, like helping to reduce your blood sugar levels, helping to have healthier cholesterol levels. So heart health, blood sugar, all of that can be helped with a plant-based diet. And then overall, we also see healthier weight, decrease in all-cause mortality, and as I mentioned, a reduced risk of chronic diseases overall. not just neurological chronic disease, but also heart disease, diabetes, cancer. And so there's so much data looking at more of a plant-based diet. And I should say, going back here, I was talking to a colleague who is, she's at Ohio State and University, and she was talking about how they're developing a culinary medicine program and how they were referring to this more as a plant slant. So kind of leaning in that direction. So we can think of it in that way too. So bringing it back to food and why these plant-based diets are so beneficial. So there are, lots of benefits, as I just mentioned, to a plant slant or more of a plant-based diet where you're eating more plants and animal foods. But there are some perhaps maybe disadvantages or things to watch out for. And for people who are having trouble maintaining their weight, sometimes a plant-based diet can be low in calories. So sometimes people might need to really eat more fats in order to make sure that they're meeting their calorie needs. Protein is another one. Even though you can easily get your protein through plant-based foods, it depends on how much protein you need. With Parkinson's, we want like the Goldilocks situation, the right amount, not too much, not too little. So a plant-based diet is actually really a great way to make sure that you're not overeating protein in many ways. Iron and calcium, so sometimes minerals, there can be other minerals that can be problematic, but it really depends on the types of foods that you're eating. And B12, so if you're a vegan, if you're not eating any animal products, you will need to take some B12. For some people, the extra fiber can cause bloating. So if you have digestive issues, you want to probably ease into that. And then it can be more expensive, but you certainly can reduce costs by eating more in season. Even shopping locally, maybe participating in a community-supported agricultural program, which that might be where you have a subscription to a farm where they deliver boxes of food to you. If you have that in your area, that can be very affordable. Also, growing your own, even if you don't have much space, you can grow quite a bit of food, even herbs and spices, or like you could grow a pea plant. I'm so excited. In a few weeks, we'll be able to put our pea plants, well, maybe a month, maybe I'm pushing it, but like in a month, we can start putting our pea plants outside or growing our peas here in Washington State. So it doesn't take a lot of space to grow certain foods, and you can, cut back on some cost that way. But I also see that it's an investment in your health. And I heard someone say once, you either spend it at the grocery store or you spend it at the doctor. So that might be a way to look at it too. And I do want to say too that there are many programs, many cities have programs where you can get assistance to get fresh foods. So whether they are in Seattle, we have a program called Fresh Bucks, where if you qualify, you actually get vouchers to go and buy produce at farmers markets and certain grocery stores. And so if you are struggling to afford fresh food, I would look into your Department of Health website to see what kind of programs you have to help support getting those foods into your diet in the most affordable way. This is another systematic review. So again, looking at a bunch of different studies. This one was actually just published in July of this year, looking at the role of nutrition in Parkinson's disease. And they started out talking about some of the influences, things that either they're thinking are linked with the cause or progression. And so they focused on things like damage of the DNA, our genetics, that might be linked. Also thinking about influence of things like heavy metals, which could come from, environmental exposures, pesticide exposures, gut dysbiosis, so that imbalance of bacteria in the gut. Oxidative stress was a big topic too, in terms of that inflammation and neuroinflammation. And we already talked about how phytonutrients and plant-based foods really help a lot with encouraging a healthy balance of bacteria in the gut, reducing inflammation. If you're buying organic or foods that are not sprayed with pesticides, that is also helpful. And I just want to say that if you have farmers markets, I know, January, February aren't the best time for farmers markets, depending on where you live. But there are many farmers who don't spray. They're not certified organic, but if you get to know some of them, you'll know that they're not putting chemicals on their food, and they can be really affordable way to get good, healthy produce as well. And then when it comes to heavy metals, even if you're living in a city or if you are in an environment where you might have some exposure or maybe occupational exposure, by taking in those phytonutrients, it helps to support what I call our organs of elimination. So a lot of those phytonutrients actually help our liver to process things we might get exposed to. The other thing is to drink plenty of water. The solution to pollution is dilution. So making sure that you've got those, systems of elimination working properly so that you can help get rid of things that you might be exposed to. So in this paper, they reviewed 52 randomized clinical trials on nutrition and Parkinson's, and they overwhelmingly found that a Mediterranean-style diet adherence was associated with less motor and non-motor symptoms, less inflammation, including neuroinflammation, and a healthier gut microbiota. So we see that that comes up over and over. In our last class, we did talk about a Mediterranean diet pattern. And we see here that, Mediterranean diets are really based off of plant-based foods. And so we see here this, this plant slant again, right? And I like this Mediterranean pattern because it very much closely follows what we talked about last week in terms of the data that Dr. Mishley has published on, where, thinking about some of these foundations of health and the diet and lifestyle factors associated with slower progression. We've got physical activity, connection with others being so incredibly important, eating meals with others if possible. And then here we see all of the plant-based foods. And then we see the seafood up here as well. Eggs would actually move down a little bit lower because they are associated with people who are progressing more slowly. But, eating these other like meats, sweets, dairy products, like minimizing those in the diet. And then if you do drink some red wine, that is also something that is found to be beneficial. If you don't drink red wine, you could have something like, purple grape juice or eat lots of berries and things like that. And the MIND diet is very similar. We did talk about those last time, but just to highlight again that, the MIND diet and the Mediterranean diet are very, very similar. One of the main differences is to have more leafy greens and more berries. So those are probably the two main differences. And Dr. Mishley did publish an article this past year on looking at the differences of those two and found that the MIND diet pattern seemed to be a little bit more protective. But if you were to look for recipes and meal ideas, looking at MIND diet Mediterranean, that's certainly a great place to go. Last week, we did talk about the association of dairy products and Parkinson's, and there have been some studies looking at that connection, whether it's the risk of developing Parkinson's. And then what Dr. Mishley has found is that people who are eating more dairy products, there is an association with people who are eating more dairy products and faster progression. And so typically we do recommend minimizing those. And as we look at this as a meta-analysis of 300,000 people, and there's quite a range of follow-up years here, 8 to 41 years, and they found that Parkinson's risk increased by 17% for every 1 cup of milk and for every ½ an ounce of cheese that people ate, and the risk was greater in men than women. So if we're looking at this data, this line right here down the middle would be what we call the null, meaning that there's if something is like right on this, then we would say it doesn't have an effect. If we're looking at this side of it, it means that there is a negative effect, so more risk. And then if we look, if we look on this side, it means that there's less risk. And if we look over here, it means that there's more risk. And so what we see overwhelmingly with these studies is that the weight is over here on the more risk with more dairy products. Anytime something crosses the line where really the data is less confident, like we're less confident that it's a true effect. And so if we see the combining of everything down here, it looks like, it does cross the line, but there's more on the side of risk. So I would say, as we take that data and we also look at, if we look at this data, this is for women where it's maybe a little less associated, but for men, we see it's clearly in the risk side. And overall, we do see risk. So that's where we might want to just think about minimizing and taking a look at how much dairy you're eating. Is it like Tuesday night and you're just eating a piece of cheese, or is it like a special occasion? But I would recommend taking a look at how much dairy you're eating and think about minimizing that. Would be just based off of some of the data that's out there. If we look at this again, thinking about that plant slant, clearly you get more of these points for those plant-based foods. And the goal again is to have negative points at the end of the day. And the more negative you are, the more that's associated with reducing that slope of progression, like we talked about in the last class. So lots of fresh vegetables. Fish has quite a negative point value. And again, negative is positive, right? So we want to be negative. Nuts and seeds, fresh fruits, fresh herbs, so much opportunity to add herbs and spices, having some wine, coconut oil, beans, legumes, green tea, olive oil, spices. These are all going to give you those negative points. And making changes is something that you can all decide for yourself how you want to do this. So, sometimes when you're looking at how you're eating and comparing it to this model of eating, you might see that there's a lot of differences and that might feel a little overwhelming. And so really, if you just start with one place, like maybe you feel good about, I'm going to add some green tea in, and I'm going to maybe add a few more herbs and spices, or I'm just going to add a couple more servings of vegetables. So I'm just going to grab a handful of baby carrots, or I'm going to add, if I have eggs in the morning, or if I have some eggs, I'm going to add some arugula to that, right? So thinking of any way that you might be able to add in. Maybe you keep like some, nuts or seeds on your counter, and you say, I'm just going to have a handful of sunflower seeds. All of that is going to take you in that direction of, moving your diet, slanting your diet more towards the type of pattern of people who are progressing more slowly. So some people kind of do a slow and steady approach, just adding small changes over time. Some people are kind of leapfrogs where they'll say, I'm going to do it all tomorrow. But know also that small changes that are sustained can have a really big effect over time. And so, if you could maintain a big change, that's great. But if it's something that you do valiantly for a short period of time and then you're not able to maintain it, then it's obviously not going to have an effect. So if you need some support, that's where, seeing a dietitian or, participating in support groups to help you to make those changes. And that's where you're going to see, the biggest benefits. When we talk about nutritional adequacy, protein, again, many people think, oh, well, if I eat a plant-based diet, I'm not going to get enough protein. And first of all, people with Parkinson's, it's probably better to have a little bit of a lighter protein intake at meals just to help prevent interference with the levodopa. So during the day, you might have a little bit lighter protein intake, and then maybe have a little bit more at night. And so sometimes we might say, well, like, how about, more plant-based foods in the day, most plant-based proteins, and then maybe at night, maybe you have fish or eggs, something that's more concentrated. And that's just so that your medication might work better during the day, since it's a protein-based medication. So embracing variety is really, I think, the best way to make sure that you have adequacy. And there's lots and lots of plant-based foods that have protein. Clearly, legumes and lentils are such a great source. On the last slide deck, I did show you some amounts on there if you wanted to go back and refer to that. So tofu, tempeh, edamame, which are the green soybeans in the pod. Pumfu, I always like to throw something maybe people haven't heard of. This is a company called Foodies. It's pretty widely available in the United States. I don't know if anyone's international, if it's available, but this is tofu. I'm putting my fingers in quotes, but it's made out of pumpkin seeds. So it's called pumfu, and it's green. It's a little less concentrated in protein than some like firm tofu, but I think it tastes pretty good. And, it just gives you a little bit of variety if you wanted to try something different. Nuts and seeds. I'm a really big proponent of, asking, looking at your meal and your plate and going, which nut or seed would go well with this meal? It gives a nice texture and helps you feel a little bit more satisfied. Nut butters can be great as well. You can have them clearly, like traditionally, like on maybe some bread or crackers or even on a banana. But you can also make nut butters into dressings and sauces and things like that. And then a lot of whole grains are really high in protein as well. So lots of ways to get plant-based proteins. So feeling full, a lot of times people say, I just don't feel full when I eat food that doesn't have protein and like an animal protein in it. And so some of the ways to overcome that would be through like visual appeal and also having more textures. So if there's lots of color and variety on your plate, it's going to help give that sense of abundance. So, a variety of different, this is, a really nice example where maybe you have a little bit of lentils. If you can keep your daytime beans to a quarter cup or less, it's only maybe about 5 grams of protein or so. Um, and then you can have a variety of different vegetables that you might have cut up. You can buy pre-cut up vegetables many times. There are pre-washed greens. Maybe give yourself some avocado. If you have some things that are raw or cooked, like if you made a bowl during the day, but maybe you had some veggies that you made the night before, maybe you grilled or sauteed them, you could throw those in with some fresh. Just a variety of different flavors and textures can be really satisfying. Clearly, adding some of your nuts and seeds. My favorite right now are pistachios, but pumpkin seeds are great. Sunflower seeds are also awesome, and these are probably the most affordable seed that you can get out there. So sunflower seeds are so great, and really amongst most of the foods that are most of the nuts and seeds that are out there, they're the highest in vitamin E, which is such a great antioxidant too. And then I really like everything but the bagel seasoning too. It's got a little salt, but it's got like some seeds in it, and it's got some garlic that's kind of crunchy. It just gives a good texture. So thinking about different ways to add texture and visual appeal can be really helpful. So here's a couple of examples. If you were going to have a daytime meal, a minestrone soup could be a great way. Soups are such an awesome way to add in so many veggies. You can kind of do it like kitchen sink, like whatever, a kitchen drawer, whatever you have in your refrigerator. So, zucchinis and carrots and celery and leafy greens and tomatoes, whatever you have. And then you could use like a gluten-free pasta, like maybe a corn or a quinoa pasta in there. And that could be satisfying in and of itself. You can also put some beans, like maybe some kidney beans, and have maybe a few crackers on the side. And if you're still hungry, adding some more fats, like maybe some avocado or some fruits. And you can see all of the variety here. And think about all of the different types of fibers, all of the different phytonutrients that you're getting. It's so powerful in terms of its anti-inflammatory effects, its gut supportive effects, metabolic effects as well, meaning like good for your heart and your cardiovascular system and your brain, all of it. So few ideas. Again, like a power bowl. I think power bowls can be really easy if you have a grain or two, and a lot of those grains you can freeze really easily. Like if you make some brown rice, or if you make quinoa or wild rice, or a variety of different grains. And here we have some brown rice with a few cannellini beans, some sweet potato, and some broccoli, and some cauliflower. And we could easily throw a few nuts and seeds on top of here, and maybe like a nice dressing. This brand, Primal Kitchen, or Chosen Foods, they make their dressings with olive oil or avocado oil. So those are a little bit more on that pro diet side, where you get some positive points. And that can just make a really, really satisfying meal. You can also make your own dressing if you don't already do that. It's very affordable. It seems like with the inflation of groceries lately that salad dressings have like doubled in price. And so what used to be $4 is like $7 for a bottle now. So I've been making a lot more of my own dressings. I've always done that a lot, but it's good to have some things on hand for when you're just in a real big hurry. But just taking some olive oil, lemon juice, a few minced garlic cloves, like just using one of those presses, some mustard, some salt and pepper in a little jar and shake it up. Super easy. If you want something with a little bit more sweetness to it, you could use a balsamic vinegar. Trader Joe's and other places, they have some of those flavored balsamic vinegars where it's like ginger or blackberry or, maybe a combination. And that can have a really fantastic flavor as well. Or white wine vinegar. So it's really like equal parts fat and like some sort of sour, whether it's apple cider vinegar or white wine vinegar or balsamic, and then maybe some garlic or other herbs and spices. I mean, it's, with that base, you can do a lot with it. And so, pretty much here it's just a pinch of salt, pinch of herb. Maybe you have a little mustard or pepper or a little maple syrup or honey. Just shake it up in a jar. And it's very easy to make. And I think tastes really great. So let's move on to maybe some plant-based meals that you could eat for protein. And so again, you might see salmon on here going, that doesn't look plant-based, but it's 3/4 plant-based, right? So we've got these green beans, and we've got some sweet potato, and we've got some onions. I'm kind of into sheet pan meals lately because they are just so easy. You can just make everything on one sheet. If you're going to put your starches on there, you just have to make sure, like this sweet potato, you see how it's really thinly sliced. Just want to make sure that your fish isn't overdone and your potatoes are raw, right? So sometimes it can take a little bit of finesse to figure that out. But if you follow a recipe, like here's a recipe, I put some links to recipes on here, then it should work out pretty good for you. So having it all be on one plate, you can see how beautiful and visually appealing that is. Here's an example of one that is completely plant-based. So you might get some tofu and just a block of tofu and slice it up and maybe brush a little bit of barbecue sauce on it, and then have some sweet potatoes and some broccoli. And you might put like a little bit of herbs and spices, maybe like some paprika, or you could put like curry, or there's any variety of spices you could put on this. Like you could put some like fajita seasoning or something on it. And this is very easy. The tofu is a lot more forgiving than the fish. This would be a really simple one to make. This one is another one that's super yummy, where you can use tofu, or maybe you want to try some pumfu or tempeh. You could also use garbanzo beans. Like you could just put a can of, or like a jar, or if you've made your own, garbanzo beans. And we've got some mushrooms and onions and potatoes here. And then we've got some fresh herbs, and then some sunflower seeds that are sprinkled over the top. And then you could have a nice, dressing that you might put over. It could be something like those, like the, any of those dressings that I was just talking about. It could be something like a barbecue. It could barbecue sauce. It could be like something that's creamy, but like plant-based. There's a whole bunch of different vegan dressings out there that you can use on top of your foods as well. This, depending on how you spice it, might just taste good on its own, depending on what you put on it. So these are just very easy, kind of one pot or one sheet meals that are very forgiving. A few more ideas, like a shrimp stir fry with lots of veggies. And I'm curious, if we look in the chat, does anyone, what kind of nut or seed could we put in a stir fry? There's one that comes to mind for me pretty quickly, but I'm curious, if you made a stir fry, what nut or seed would you want to put in there? Peanuts. Yeah, peanuts would be great. Yeah. I like cashews. I like cashews a lot. And then we also, we could do, if we wanted it to be more plant-based, we could do maybe a daytime meal would be black bean tacos. So instead of doing fish or shrimp, or, we could do black bean tacos. And you can see here all the textures in here. There's some fresh salsa. And what kind of nut or seed could you have? Maybe not on your taco, but maybe you could have some nut or seed with a taco. I often think of pepitas, or like the green pumpkin seeds are super yummy. with that. And then we've got veggie chili, or we could do it like a vegan chili. And you could do like a gluten-free cornbread or something with that, and that could be a nice plant-based meal as well. I haven't really thought about what nut or seed. Maybe it doesn't work for everything. I'm not sure if what nut or seed would go well with chili. But you could, oh, walnuts, actually you could, in place of ground beef, you could like chop up walnuts and put them in your chili. And that will give, like, a lot of times people might use chopped walnuts to kind of give a little bit more of that texture that's kind of meaty. I've seen people make ground beef, quotes, out of chopped mushrooms and walnuts. And that's something you could put like in a pasta sauce or something that would give you a little bit more of that kind of texture of having meat in there. If you get to the end of the day and you think, wait a minute, I really haven't had many greens, you could drink your greens. This is something that's really quick and easy. And, greens can be kind of intense to make into a smoothie or to drink. But if you combine them with some pineapple, so you could do fresh or frozen pineapple, like maybe just cut up a pineapple and freeze it. You could do like a cup and a half of like kale, arugula, chard, parsley. I mean, anything, like any combination. I put cabbage, I put bok choy, like any type of green you wanted to put in there. And the magic ingredient that kind of takes away any bitterness is some pineapple and some lemon, like lemon juice. You could put maybe some chia seeds in there if you wanted it a little thicker, and then just some cold water and blend that up. And you can kind of adjust the water if you want it thinner or thicker. It's a pretty easy way to get your greens. And this is actually a negative 125 points. So that's negative 125 points is very positive when we're looking at the pro diet. If we think about planning, if planning around eating plants is, or like primarily plants, is new to you, one of the things you could do is think about it systematically. So using this plate that we talked about last time. So pick a protein. So it could be fish and eggs at night, or only small portions, during the day. And, it could be a nut, or like nuts or seeds. It could be maybe some tofu. It could be a variety of different beans that you might have. And then pick at least a couple of vegetables. So sometimes I recommend we'll pick one raw and one cooked, or maybe at least a couple of colors on the plate. And it could be as simple as, I'm just going to grab some baby carrots and I'm going to, slice off some red pepper, and have some of that. So just think about how you can add as many different types of vegetables as possible, and try to have, like, if you can, half your plate be those vegetables. Leafy greens are always great. Pick a starch, something with fiber. So brown rice, wild rice, buckwheat, sorghum, farro, polenta. I always recommend organic corn-based products because corn has really high pesticide residues, which would recommend to not have that exposure with Parkinson's. Oats, brown rice, quinoa, or corn pasta, whole grain, gluten-free breads, or spelt, winter squash, red, yellow, or purple potatoes, sweet potatoes. There's such a variety of amazing squashes, especially winter squashes right now. So many different great starches you could choose from. A nut or a seed, so maybe a walnut or an almond, pumpkin seed, pecans, cashews, hemp seeds, pistachios, hazelnuts, sunflower seeds, just a variety. And I like to keep mine in jars, just so that they're just right there, and I can just take a handful or add them to my meals. And then something to add flavor: dressing, marinade, spices, some sort of fermented food or pickle. Those add so many great benefits for the gut. Something fermented, and also so much flavor. Sometimes if I have grains with beans and veggies, I'll just put like some sauerkraut or some fermented vegetable in there and mix it in. And that gives so much flavor. I don't really need much else. Let's talk about a few of the considerations if you are going more plant, like if you're slanting really over towards plants, and especially if you're minimizing dairy products like we talked about, we do want to make sure that we're replacing sources of calcium. So most adults need about 1,000 to 1,200 per day. You might need more, or less depending on your, circumstance, your personal circumstances. But it's not hard to get calcium from plant-based foods, especially leafy greens. And I love the synergy of, or I love it when there's a synergy where these leafy greens are so great for your bones, but we also talked about how leafy greens are so great for the brain and show up in the pro diet research that those are foods that are so associated with slower progression. So it's kind of nice to think, oh, if I eat leafy greens, I'm going to help my bones and my brain. So lots of leafy greens are really high in calcium. So, collard greens, kale, beet greens, bok choy, red or green lettuce is a little bit on the lower side, but I just wanted to put that there because it's so common. Beans are a great source of calcium. So white beans are really high. Black beans, chickpeas, I would say for the most beans are about 100, like 100 milligrams per cup. Nuts and seeds have a good source as well. Like if you like sesame seeds, those are great. Chia seeds, almonds, most nuts and seeds are going to be a great source. Tofu, if you have firm or extra firm tofu, quite a lot. And then if you use any fortified dairy-free milks, those can be 300 to 450 milligrams per cup. So it all can kind of add up over the day, depending on, what you're eating. To ensure that you're getting enough calories. So if you, I have seen it where people have switched over to more plant-based foods and then their weight starts to go down. So if that happens and that's something that you don't want to happen, just be careful about skipping meals, thinking about how do you add just a little extra, like typically fats are a great way to do that. Some extra avocado, some nice olive oil that you might drizzle over the top of your food. Adding in some snacks, having some smoothies. These are great ways to make sure that you're getting extra calories. So these are some examples of, 100 to 200 calorie boosts. And if you do that multiple times, hopefully that will help switch you away from that weight loss if that's happening. So, a tablespoon of good olive oil or a couple tablespoons of peanut butter, almond butter, or this Miyoko's is I think a brand of dairy-free butter that's really delicious. And it's very much on that pro diet. It's got coconut and cashew. It's made out of that. Some nuts and seeds, some avocado or guacamole if you like that. And then there's also some bars that are in that kind of pro diet, which are also higher in calories and not super high in protein. So like Bobo bar, I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures of them, like these Bobo bites or Bobo bars. Those are really great. These Emmy's peanut butter coconut cookies, they're actually not super high in sugar. These Alter Eco are almond butter bombs. They're not super high in sugar either. These chia bars I think are great, and they also chia seeds great for digestion if you have any constipation. And then this Miyoko's butter is something that I think works pretty well for people too. Again, you can use the chronometer. This is a free app if you wanted to track and see how much calcium you're getting. You could put in everything you eat for the day and you can say, oh gosh, I'm only meeting 70% of my calcium needs. So, if you're getting 700, then you could say, okay, how could I add 300 more milligrams of calcium, right? And then you could go back here and go, okay, I just need to add, one serving of oat milk, or I need to add, a couple handfuls of nuts and some beans and a serving of greens or something like that. You can just think about how you can reliably make sure that you're supporting your bones. So a few of these resources I showed you last time. So, just want to keep showing these to people that they're really great resources for finding recipes and inspiration. The Mediterranean diet, so Old Ways Foundation, that pyramid that I showed you came from them. They have tons of recipes on there, and they talk about heritage foods. So really looking at dietary patterns around the world of people who are the most long-lived and people who are, the healthiest. So looking at heritage foods from multiple places around the world. Eating Well magazine is kind of one of my go-to. They have so many great recipes, and you can look up, they have a Mediterranean diet center with beautiful pictures, and whenever they have like feta cheese or those types of things, you can get the dairy-free alternatives like Violife feta or something like that to just put in there. Um, there are some books for the Mind Diet. Not as many resources for Mind Diet because it's not as studied or as um, it's a newer diet, but you can definitely find lots of resources for the Mind Diet. Lots of vegan recipes. So these are a few different options here. This book, Vasanto Molina is a dietitian who is vegan and has written extensively about how to follow a nutritionally balanced vegan diet. So I think that's a great book and has lots of great recipes. And these are also some blogs that I think are great, like Pick Up Limes, The Full Helping, The Minimalist Vegan, Vegan Risha. This is really great for like Indian cooking, Forks Over Knives, the Bean Institute, Cookus Interruptus. I think I might have shared with you last time. So this was, I've worked for many years at Bastyr University. It's an integrative medicine university, and our culinary director has this website. It's improv, comedy, and cooking. So she's an improv comedian and also does cooking videos. And so there's always something funny or weird that happens in the video. They're short and has the culinary curriculum from Bastyr, which is nice. All recipes, you have to, put in your prompts about wanting Mediterranean or plant-based, but a lot of the recipes have videos too, which is really nice. So we ran out of time last time to talk about ChatGPT, but this is artificial intelligence that can be really helpful for meal planning. You could just say, provide 5 dinner ideas using Mind Diet principles that can be made in 20 minutes or less, provide recipes in a shopping list. So if you haven't played around with it, it's really great. For meal planning, you can even say, I have these 5 ingredients. Can you tell me some ideas of what I can make with it? It's actually pretty good at making recipes and giving you meal ideas. And it can give you shopping lists, and it will organize by like proteins, starches, it'll organize it by the section of the grocery store. So and it's free to use. It's through Microsoft, and you might want to give that a try. So next class will be fighting inflammation with your fork. I will talk more about different ways that you can get phytonutrients and more plant-based foods into your diet. So we'll keep expanding on that. What I want to do is address some of the questions that have come up. I know we have, a few minutes left. So I see that there's some in the chat. And also there was a really great question that was emailed to me about plastics. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about plastic. We talked about that last time. That's something that came up in the latest publication that Dr. Mishley did, that people who are exposed to more plastic, it seems to be associated with people who are progressing more quickly. So again, with that association, it doesn't mean if you have something that touches plastic, you're going to progress more quickly. But when we look at the constellation of things that are associated with people who are progressing more quickly, plastic does come up. And it's more specifically drinking out of plastic water bottles. So if you are somebody who finds yourself like buying those big packs of plastic water bottles, I would try to avoid doing that. Getting yourself like a clean canteen or one of those stainless steel bottles. Mason jars work pretty well as for drinking out of as well. I know glass actually can be a challenge if you're struggling, with holding on to things. So maybe only if you're at home and sitting at your desk. But trying to avoid plastic is a good idea. Now, let's talk about the reality of that, because if you don't make everything from scratch and buy things directly from a farm, I mean, everything comes in plastic. Like this pump foo has plastic. I mean, we all get exposed to plastic. So I think the thing is to try to minimize as much as possible. So minimizing as much as possible. If there's another choice, right? If there's something that doesn't have plastic, then go ahead and choose that. Like, for instance, if you feel like you really like, if you eat a lot of tofu and, tofu comes in plastic containers, maybe there's an Asian grocery store in, where you live where they make fresh tofu and you can buy that. So that could be an option. However, let's talk about the degrees of risk with different foods that are exposed to plastic. With plastic water bottles, the squishy, soft plastic, those are the ones that tend to leach more of those chemicals into our food. And there's a lot of research that's been coming out about, especially, plastic, like water bottles. But we have to wonder about other foods that are also touching plastic. So I would say, think about the type of food. If it's something that's very fatty, it's going to interact with that plastic and absorb more of that plastic. So think about, if it's something like, an oil, maybe you buy olive oil in a plastic bottle. In chemistry, like attracts like. And so plastic is kind of like a fat-based molecule. And so anything that has a lot of fat in it is going to absorb more. They're going to kind of meld together. So think about if you've ever had like a spaghetti sauce that you've put in a plastic container. That plastic container turns orange, right? It's because of the lycopene, which is a fat-based molecule in tomatoes that leaches, that combines with the plastic, because fat attracts, like fat is attracted to fat, and it kind of melds together. So try to not store your food in plastic as much as possible. Try to think about the types of foods, right, that if you're going to buy like a pasta sauce or a, like an olive oil or something like that, try to get it in a glass bottle. If you're going to cook in plastic, that's going to be something that's going to put a lot of those chemicals in. So I'd say put it in glass, don't cook in plastic. Try to minimize the food in the plastic as much as possible. And I think do your best to try to avoid it, but know that it's pretty difficult unless you make everything from scratch. The other thing to think about is, how do you support your organs of elimination? We already talked about that a little bit, but if you're eating a lot of those phytonutrients and you're drinking a lot of water, that's going to help you to, minimize some of the effects of the plastic as well. So I think that's probably the best we can do around plastic. And I would say for sure, get rid of the water bottles, and then just try to get as much as you can in other types of containers, and also storing your food and cooking your food not in plastic. That was very long. Sorry about that. I have myself just kind of meandering. But let me go ahead and look at some of these questions that have come up. So how
And
much
Kelly,
protein? Yep.
Kelly, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt 1 second. I complicated matters because I enabled the Q&A function as well, which I will disable because it makes zero sense if we have chat and Q&A. But there is one question in the Q&A. Can you see it?
Do you want to just
I can read it to you if you want. It is, what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting for people with PD? And then all the rest of the questions are in the chat.
How about if I'm going to talk about intermittent fasting with inflammation. I want to talk about it next time, just because I think that could be a little bit of I want to present some data about it and also talk about like who would benefit and who might not benefit. So if it's okay, I'm going to table that one for next time, because it really goes well with the with inflammation.
Sounds good. This is a series, so that's perfect.
So somebody asked, how much protein should someone eat in a day? And essentially it's about 0.8 to 1 grams per kilogram is how much you would typically eat. And then I did talk a little bit about protein last time, and we do want to sort of spread that out through the day. So with Parkinson's, we would maybe do a little bit less, like 5 to 10 grams per meal during the day, and then maybe more like 20 to 30 grams at night. I would say that, I've been a dietitian for about 24 years, and I've done so many of these calculations, and I'd say the vast majority of people are probably like, if you're in a smaller body, you're probably in the 50 to 60 grams of protein, and if you're in a larger body, probably like 70 to 80 grams of protein per day. But there are ways to calculate your individual needs with, it's usually 0.8 to 1 grams per kilogram of like healthy body weight. Would Mary's crackers be considered a highly processed? I would call them a lightly to moderately processed, because if you look at the ingredients, you can understand everything, and there's not ingredients in there that you probably wouldn't have in your cupboard. So I would call them like maybe more lightly to maybe moderately processed. How do sweet potatoes rank? They're great. And I don't know, not every food has a number associated with it, but sweet potatoes are a very nourishing food, so I would definitely include those. Why gluten-free bread? So gluten or bread shows up on the association. So people who are eating more breads, and it's there is an international population, but when thinking about this, I would think about the quality of the bread. So if you're eating white bread versus, if you're going to be having more of like a whole grain bread, I think there's going to be a difference there. But the data it wasn't really identified there. It was just the association that if people are eating more bread, there's a slight association, not strong, but a slight association. And it could be something around reactions that people could have to gluten. Lori doesn't always describe the exact reason why, but it's just an association. So some people are eating less gluten, and I'm not a big fan of gluten-free products necessarily, because I think they're really highly processed, but I would just say embrace the variety of different grains that are out there. Like have some sweet potatoes, have some quinoa, have some sorghum or barley, or a variety of different types of grains if you're finding yourself eating lots of bread. And I think maybe in this country, bread can have pesticide exposure and things like that too. Oh, fermented pickles and things, typically you're going to find those in the refrigerator section of grocery stores. And if you go to a health food store, they're so popular, you're definitely going to find a lot of different types of lacto-fermented vegetables. How do we find and use the PD modification tool charts? On the last slide deck, I have multiple slides, if you have access to that, on how to access the scoring tool. There's an app for it if you wanted to do your own scoring on the PD score. And then I believe there's also some handouts that are associated with the previous one that has that scoring tool that you can download as well. Oh, this is a good question. I know we're at 12:01, so I'll try to make it really brief, but I think I can go into more detail on this next time. Is about coconut oil, and that it's high in saturated fats. So it's a good thing that you caught that, because yeah, definitely, saturated fat from animal foods does have an association with inflammation. And coconut oil does have saturated fat. The length of the fat is shorter than in animal fats. They're longer chain. And coconut also has a bunch of different phytonutrients in it that are anti-inflammatory. But it is true, if somebody does have high cholesterol, I don't recommend them to eat a lot of coconut. And so if that's the case for you, I would say don't go crazy with the coconut. But there are so this is an association study, so it doesn't always explain the why, but coconut products is associated with people who are progressing more slowly. And one of the things that could be happening is that there are certain foods that are sort of associated with each other. And so that could be the reason why, why coconut shows up. But it is one of those foods. And there is a little bit difference between plant-based foods that have saturated fat versus animal-based foods that have saturated fat. So I can talk a little bit more about that next time. Silicone. Silicone is not the same as plastic. I'll look into that a little bit more for next time as well. I don't know if that's something that has been in the research at all. You know, what you might get exposed to, you know, if you're using silicone baking mats and that kind of thing. My understanding is that it definitely doesn't, or that it doesn't leach chemicals as, you know, much as plastic does. But I mean, I would need to just look into that a little bit more. But that's not something that has come up with the Parkinson's research that Dr. Mishley has done. And then hard plastic. So, you know, I would just say for hard, there's a question on, you know, is hard plastic okay? I would just try to minimize plastic as much as possible because we're already getting exposed to it so much. And that if, you know, if you have water, so it's time and temperature that make a big difference, right? So if you're storing water in a water bottle and you drink it pretty quickly, that's different than if, you know, you had it in there for a couple days or it was in a hot car or something like that. I just would recommend trying to minimize as much as possible, just given all of the plastic that we're exposed to. So great questions. And thank you so much for showing up today. We're going to be talking more about inflammation next week. And I will, like I said, I will definitely talk about intermittent fasting, different dietary patterns that can be associated with inflammation, and also I'll take a look into silicone a little bit more. But my understanding is it's not as chemically oriented as plastic.
Great, thank you. I'll be particularly curious about the silicone because we've been replacing a lot of things with silicone, so because we think it's better. So,
Yeah.
so thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kelly. Another really informative session. I will be stopping the recording right now. Yes, I'm.